Okay. All right. So, sorry to start our day off with all that doom and gloom. Let's talk about something much more pleasant. Let's continue where we left off on this lecture about discipline-based art education, and then dive into the next lecture about how we assess art done by children. And so, yeah, like I was talking about at the end of class on Wednesday, when we get to pre-adolescent children, this is one of my favorite stages. I love this interesting blend that happens between children who are not between children, but within children. This interesting mix that happens between wanting to make representations of things, but having very simplified versions of what those things look like. A lot of it can be very symbolic. They want to, right, make an image of a bird, a person, fish, a boat, right? But if you ever just close your eyes and just, without trying to imagine a lot of detail, imagine a bird, just a bird, not a specific bird. I'm not listing any species, anything, just bird. And that's that very simplified symbol that sort of pops into your mind probably doesn't look too different from that. Right? That's what kids end up at this age sort of drawing. It's this abstraction that's wanting to also be representational. There's a little more of a concern with proper scale and proportions, versus what we were talking about with the children just a little younger than this, right? For whom scale means nothing. Or if it does, oftentimes the scale will be a matter of what they see as being most important, right? In this case, scale starts to be a thing, right? They start thinking about, well, this should be bigger than this. They start thinking about, sometimes even thinking about a little bit of perspective. Like this kid is clearly thinking about how the fact that if this boat is closer and that boat is further away, that boat should be higher than this one. Those kind of things start occurring to students. So that said, my question here, what elements or principles do you think might be appropriate to start bringing up when kids start bringing you stuff like this? What kind of things could you, and I'm not saying things that you would use as suggestions. If you're talking about this, what elements and principles could you bring up? Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's a ton of rhythm going on here. And you can even point out, I love how the way you curve this fish brings my eyes right up into this bird. And then this bird brings my eyes right over here into this boat. And that sort of brings my eyes up into these birds. And yeah, whether it was intentional or not on the part of the kid, that's going to help the kid to feel good about what they've done. And when they're working next time, they might think about that. Like, what if I do kind of line these things up in a certain way to create some rhythm? What else could we talk about? I mean, in this particular case, I'd say the use of color is pretty awesome. All these pinks and blues and how it's interesting that some of the colors are very much related to how our eyes would see that thing. And in other places, it's just what the kid liked, right? Like the kid was like, all right, sky needs to be blue. The water needs to be blue. But, if I want the people to be, to be pink, I'll make them pink. And so a conversation can be had about like, okay, I love all your colors. Can you tell me why is this one person orange? I see you have 3 who are pink and 1 who's orange. Who is this? Right? Conversations like that can be had with this kid. And that then starts to lead into what kind of feedback might you give? I think to a certain extent, we already touched on it, a little bit of it, because in talking about rhythm, we could talk about what a good job we see of the rhythm. We can give some feedback about the color. You can even say something like what I was just talking about, like, hey, I love how you thought about the fact that that boat, if it's further away, would be higher in the picture than this one. Good job. I'm impressed that you thought about that. And if the kid seems confused when you mention that, well, you can start talking about that. Like, look out at the world. The things that are closer to you are lower, and the things that are further away are higher, right? Now, none of that is meant to lead the child toward one particular style of art. We're not trying to say, yeah, birds don't look like that. Maybe start observing birds a little better, right? And we're also not suggesting that everything should be perfectly abstract, right? If that's what the student's interested in, great. We're praising what we see. We're talking about what we like within it, and then discussing those terms and ideas that the student may have either intuitively used or didn't even realize they had used. And we can start talking about that, and that can maybe inform the next drawing that they do. Then we get to adolescence and like teenagers. And once kids reach that point, a teacher really just has to take into consider each individual child's personal artistic ability and developmental level. Because some adolescence is the point at which the phrase that I love, that I've heard many a time, is that we are all artists when we're kids, and then at some point we quit. And adolescence is usually that spot when that happens. It happens because one feels discouraged because of what they see others being able to accomplish, that they think, well, I can't do that. Or that enthusiasm that the adults in their lives may have shown for all of their drawings that weren't particularly realistic looking starts to go away because the adults start really saying, well, what's that supposed to be? There are any number of things that happen that right at adolescence, that seems to be the moment that most people will stop if they stop. So you might have an adolescent in an art class who's still kind of drawing a little bit like the developmental level before them. You might have one who's really starting to hone their skills, and you might have somebody who's doing work that's on the level of somebody you might expect to be in college, or even someone who's a professional. All those things can happen in adolescence. And a teacher should keep all those things in mind and sort of think about, then, how do I design my curricula this semester so that I make sure that this student whose skills are incredible is challenged, but that I don't leave behind that student who's maybe still a developmental step behind or two. And that there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to discourage them. I want them to gain something out of this class as well. All right. So then let's talk about, I did just now, just mere moments ago, I put the PDF of these slides up because I realized as I was getting set up in here that I had not done that yet. So my apologies for that, but they're there. So in our misconceptions about art, one of the things that we talked about is that people sort of assume that art is subjective, and so anyone's opinion is valid, what have you. And that grading art is sometimes, and I've had this, I have run into people that when I mention that I teach art, they're like, oh, that must be an easy gig because you can just you can just give whatever grade you feel like giving something. Right? Like people have that sort of assumption, and I have to admit, now I don't think that they're right. Number one, first and foremost, I got to say that don't think that they're right, but it can be difficult to figure out what criteria to grade on sometimes, and in a situation where you have to justify the results that you're giving with administration, who's very accustomed to how all of the other disciplines are taught, it can be difficult to get them to understand how the data that you're giving them makes any sense. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we go about assessing student work in a way that is not detrimental to the child, but that also does provide that data that administrators want, right? So how can we assess, judge, and grade the art of children? See a couple people furiously writing things down. As always, you do have the PDF of these slides. So when it comes to, we'll start in the same place as last time with very young children. At a very young age, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to assess the work that they're doing when it comes to artwork. Because, and again, like I told you last time, this big giant wall of text is for my benefit since I can't have my notes up on the screen. Things that I think are important enough to write down, I highlight in yellow. But since for a young child, like art's just a new discovery. It's this thing that they just think is awesome. And they're just experimenting and playing and having fun. And because our adult minds just work so differently from how theirs do, this work really can't be judged by the standards that we might impose on an adult. We just can't. It would be unfair. They don't have the motor skills. They don't see the world the way we do. They don't think about the world the way we do. They don't have the years of connecting certain colors to certain emotions that we do. Right? We see a painting that's got a lot of blue in it, and we can't help it. That's associated with like sadness for us, or like we talked earlier about the warm and cool colors. So it's associated with coolness to us. And the kid's just like, oh, I like that blue, so I used it. Right? So trying to hold them to the same kind of standards as an adult just isn't fair and isn't possible. So really at this point, it has to be based on participation, following directions, and attitude. And not in any form or fashion an assessment of the work itself. So it's things like, did the child participate well, or did they refuse to participate? When they were given specific directions, like cleaning up or staying in their area, what have you, did the child do as told? Did the child present a positive attitude during the activity, or were they disruptive? But the quality, in quotations there, of the work can't be and shouldn't be assessed. What possible criteria could you use? It would be wonderful if we could somehow go back in time and access the way our brains worked at that extremely young age. maybe then we can make an assessment. But there's just no way. Any kind of assessment that we try to make could be detrimental, other than good job. Sure, you can talk to the child about what's good. Right? I love those colors. I love these lines. I love all the way you made all this swirly stuff up here. We certainly don't want to have that question of what is this? What were you trying to draw? Right? We can certainly talk about what we like about it. Trying to make any suggestions of what can be done differently just isn't going to compute for a kid. To try to say you should have done something differently to the kid is going to be like, I don't get it. Like, it couldn't have been done any way other than this. This is the way it was done. The kid's not even thinking to the future drawing. The kid's living in the moment. Now, not extremely young, but like younger children, right? Those who are starting to get maybe a little more representational. Gaining those better motor skills, and they're starting to get an ability to talk about their work. That age, like I said, my daughter now has hit 5 and can start telling me the stories behind the things that she's done. Where often it was just like, hey, look at this. Then she kind of went through a phase where she would name it, like, these are hearts, this is my teacher, this is me. Now there's like stories behind the work, right? So this is a point at which you want to, if you're teaching a class of this age group, establish a portfolio system where each student can store their work. Rarely at a younger age do they even think about that work after they finished it. They kind of make something, they're like, hey, look at this, and they're proud of it. And you'll put it up. You might put it up on the refrigerator or something with the kids, because like, yeah, okay, yeah, I did that, I guess. Like, whereas at this stage, we might want to start storing it. Oops. All right. Also, a good idea is to have them date the work so that the portfolio can allow the child to see their own progress by making comparisons. At the beginning of the semester, I was doing this. By the end of it, I was doing this. Oh, I can see how I got there. And a good idea is to establish an area of the classroom for displaying art. And involve the children in making self-assessments and choosing the best quality work to go up there. Of the stuff in your portfolio for this particular assignment, or for this particular 6 weeks, or what have you, what do you think's the strongest 3 pieces? Pick them out. Tell me why. Let's put them on the wall. And you want to establish a list of skills and concepts that you want the children to learn. Skills. You want them to be able to hold a paintbrush right and be able to flick their wrist in certain ways and make circles or lines. Concepts. You want them to get understand things like symmetry or mixing colors or rhythm and balance. Those are things that can be talked about at this point. Repetition. And then base your assessments and your grades on how well the child has grasped those specific skills that you set up in that list. Those skills and concepts, that is. And how well the child has become able to recognize the strengths in their own work. That way you help the child themselves gain experience, gain skills, gain an understanding of concepts. And get, as I said, you start gaining some confidence as they can say, not just, well, I want to put this one up because I like it, but okay, why do you like it? What is it about it that you like? Well, I like these particular things, and I think that I used this orange in a particularly good way. I think this self-portrait looks more like me than the self-portrait I did 3 weeks ago, so I want to put it up. What have you. But also, it gives you some data to send up the chain to the administrators. I had some very specific skills that I wanted the students to learn. Here's how they did percentage-wise or what have you with those skills and concepts. All right, I'm going to move on. So when it comes to portfolios for children, it can be just a simple, handmade, personalized portfolio. If you had a class, an art class in middle or high school, you probably made one of these. I know I certainly did, and that was back in the 90s. And we made these, these personalized portfolios made with a couple of sheets of poster board stapled or taped together, and you'd put your work in it. Right? It's a way of taking some pride in the thing because you made it yourself. Or a portfolio could also be just a storage area in a particular area of the classroom with designated spaces for each child. And that space is their portfolio. In either case, those portfolios allow children to take personal pride in the craftsmanship of the work and the organization of the work. When I say craftsmanship, putting the work in a portfolio keeps it from getting crinkled up, ruined, have something spilled on it. And organization, right? Whether it's, all right, I want you to organize these from the first thing you did to the last thing that you did in class, or let's split these up by unit, or can you organize them by color, whatever, right? Those are the things that you can talk to the students about. And it works as an easy means of tracking their own progress as their skills improve. Because that portfolio lets them see, here's the stuff I was doing in the beginning, and look at the improvements I've made, or at least the skills that I have gained since then, and the steps in between. And that's encouraging for a student. Then having display areas in the classroom is also important. So as a teacher, if you're teaching art, you should designate an area of the classroom for displaying student artwork. And there should be a specific space assigned to each child. This little area right here is your own little personal gallery. And then at the end of each unit, like we were just talking about, guide the children through self-assessment in choosing the best quality work to display. Have them not just say, like I mentioned a moment ago, I want to put this one up there because I like it. Encourage them to tell you why. Whether that be based on emotional reasons or on skills and concepts that you've been talking about in the class, getting that feedback and getting a child to talk about those things helps not only to build their skills in the art itself, but helps to build their critical thinking skills. Because it's no longer just intuitive. You help a child to see that there are thought processes that can lead us to making decisions. Not that there's any one right or wrong answer at the end. It's the thought process that gets us there that counts. And the reason you want to specifically say, all right, this amount of space is yours, is that now you put a, with a limited amount of space, you put that child in a situation where they must make judgments in order to choose which works to hang. If you've got a really big space and you're like, pick out which ones you'd like to hang, they can just say, well, I'll hang it all. But if they've, in the case of this little thing right here, they've only got 4 spots where they can put something up. So that child needs to spend some time picking out what they think are the 4 strongest pieces and encourage them to tell you why. Why are you picking these? And again, I can remember doing that right on up through high school, where Miss Johnson, it was her name, I'll always remember her. Miss Johnson had a lot of boards just like these all over the classroom. They were, I say just like these, they were cork board, so that you could push pins into it. And there would be a certain area that was designated to be just yours. And she would encourage you each time you came into class. Well, no, I take it back. It was once a week, so it was like every Monday. You'd be encouraged to pick out the pieces you wanted that could fit right there. We get up to older children. Like middle schoolish, right? For older students, establishing a rubric for grading is a good idea. Because the kids can understand that at this point. And again, it provides that almighty data for the administrators. So just like before, establish a list of skills and concepts that you want the student to learn. But this time around, assign a value, a percentage, or a number of points, what have you, to each of these things that you want the children to learn, so that you can assess them on those things in a rubric. And so you base your assessments and grades on the accumulation of these numbers in combination with what we were talking about earlier, participation and attitude considerations. Those don't go away. They're just not the sole thing that you're assessing. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I had another bullet point there. It looked like I should. I'll leave it for a sec since some people are still writing down notes. All right. I'm going to move on now. Again, I promise you have this still. Continuing with older children, just like we did with the age group before them, you want to continue that portfolio system and display system for that matter. Continue to have them make critical judgments of their own work. Build that upon the very specific skills and concepts. And at this age, students can be taught techniques of drawing naturalistically from observation. Their brains are starting to come out of the more abstract phase. And students by this point will have seen enough art that maybe they're starting to have an interest in art that looks realistic. So you can teach these skills. You can teach them to all the students. If you've got a student who struggles with it or who just isn't interested, fine. Encourage that student, but let them know that when you're done with this, if that's not something they're interested in ever doing again with art, they don't have to. But they're all the stronger for having it tried. You can introduce students to using a sketchbook at this point as well. Give specific assignments for the sketchbook, because a lot of times kids won't know what they should do with that sketchbook. Hell, college students sometimes don't know what to do with their sketchbook. But also encourage drawing things that they are interested in, personal experimentation, collage, and journaling, etc., etc. And a certain percentage of the grade for the class should be dedicated to that sketchbook. And whether you have a rubric for it, at this age, probably is a good idea to have a rubric for the sketchbook as well. That rubric could be, because let me kind of backtrack on what I just said. Because yes, a rubric on the sketchbook would not be a bad idea, but I wouldn't base it on those same kind of things that we were talking about up there. Because the sketchbook is the place where someone should be able to experiment and play and make screw-ups. So your rubric could be more on the lines of like effort, dedication, frequency of entries, things like that, as opposed to whatever sort of skills and concepts that you want to see in the work that they complete. All right. So like I said, establishing rubrics. A lot of art teachers don't like doing this kind of thing. And certainly I do not do it on the college level at all. Because the worry is, okay, so let me dive into the worry about it first, and then we'll talk about how it works. But the worry about it is that if you establish a rubric system for grading a work of art, and you've got these very specific skills and concepts that you're asking for a student to display, and you're assessing how well they've displayed each of those things in the work, that what you start doing is creating a child who's just an automaton who cranks out the kind of work that's going to address those specific things, and they don't put any sort of personality rather into that work. So it's this balancing act, because administrations want numbers. They want something that they can show that indicates progress, not just an art teacher saying, well, Jessica here is really showing some growth. I've seen the emotional maturity of her work increase. She may not be working very representationally yet, but wow, the stories and how creative she is. And an administrator is like, okay, that's all good and fine, but what can I do with that? I can't send that out as numbers. So it's this balancing act of creating rubrics that measure the kinds of things that you want to see happening in the students without stifling the students, but also provides those numbers to the administration to show success or lack of success. So it's things like this rubric over here, right, where there are numbers for each of the things. So project gets turned in, and on basic skills like following directions and craftsmanship, you've got a grade of 4 through 1, 4 in this case being complete understanding of class dynamics, exceptional skills of media, down to 1 does not meet expectations. Higher level thinking skills, so originality and creativity, a 4 being unique, very original choices, 2 down here being seldom original, the work is possibly copied, and 1 being no original ideas, meaning that they're maybe just completely and utterly copying something else that they've seen. Applying knowledge and lifelong learner. So are they using the elements and principles of design? 4, complete understanding and use of the elements and principles, down to a 1, no concept of them. Basic social and participation skills, like we talked about, attitude, teamwork and communication, always contributes. Excellent communication down to no attempt to communicate, or they're argumentative or disinterested. And then, score each of these things on a scale of 1 to 4, add up those numbers. Over here, there's even a scale for what number of points equates to what letter grade. And like I said, sketchbooks. Sketchbooks should be a place for kids to experiment and play. We already kind of talked about sketchbooks in here, so I don't want to dive into it too much. But with children, you want to encourage the journaling for sure. Making sure that the children understand that what you put down into that is confidential up to certain limits. Right? Make sure the child understands if you make any threats to life of limb to myself or someone that I know, or if you admit to a crime in this thing, I can't help it. I'm a designated reporter. I have to let someone know about those things. The rest of it, I will never tell anyone else about. So you can feel free to write as you would like to write. Encourage them to play and not just draw. If that's what they want to do, fine. But if a student says, I'm not very good at drawing, then encourage them to cut paper, paste, create designs. Not everything that is in the sketchbook has to be a quote-unquote traditional understanding of a sketch. And at this age, at the adolescent/teenage age, like you find lots of stuff that looks like this. You're going to find lots of anime. You're going to find lots of drawings that look like the cartoons that those kids enjoy. Encourage them to take their notes in the sketchbook. And that it's perfectly okay to also doodle on the page where you're taking your notes. To this day, I still do that. That's probably something I would not have done had my art teacher not encouraged me. To this day, if I'm sitting in a faculty meeting, at the moment that I'm like, okay, everything I'm hearing is a repeat of what I've already heard, I'm wandering off into the margins and doodling. And then when there comes a moment where like, okay, what I just heard is important. Now I'm writing that down. Play and have them date stuff. Have them date what they do in a sketchbook. I don't ask necessarily for that in the college level, but in high school, it's not a bad idea. This is not traditional at all, right? This is not, traditional in what we might think stereotypically should be in a sketchbook. The student's just ripping stuff up, gluing it in. Maybe they're doing a little bit of sketching within it, but for the most part, it's stuff they found other places, and they're gluing or taping it in, things of that nature. Just creating a collage. Encourage that kind of thing in that age group. I didn't put animation on this particular slide. The other thing is, when it comes to teaching art, I imagine, I can't speak for other disciplines because I'm not involved in them, but I imagine this is true to a certain extent in a lot of disciplines, that you're going to find yourself having to educate the parents, guardians, support groups of your kids just as much as the children. Because parents will often have an expectation of what should be happening. Like if my child is improving in their art, I should be seeing these very specific things, and I'm not seeing them. Or the parent, guardian, whomever, who's like, it sounds like all you guys do is just go in that classroom and play. Couldn't my students, couldn't my child's time be better spent? So send the children home with progress reports that make clear to the parent what the child has learned. Again, my 5-year-old who's in kindergarten, that's already happening. She's coming home with art projects, but the art project was done with something printed on it that explains this is what your child was doing. They don't know, in my case, that they're sending it home to an art teacher who is aware of what they're doing, but this is what the teacher is accomplishing. And involve the children in the production of these progress reports so that they are just as creative as the projects they do in the class. Now, that was missing from my art education as a kid because, as the story I told you guys, we really didn't have much in the school, the little small school I went to, until I hit high school. And by then, Miss Johnson wasn't trying to make us make pretty decorative report cards to take home. But on, elementary, middle school level, that's a really great idea because it invests the child. The child can be the one who also then educates the adult. So you get things like this, right? Where the child has been just as involved in making this assessment report for the teachers as the teacher themselves. They would have had the kid glue their picture. They seem to have written their name. I wouldn't be surprised if they picked the color of their paper. And then a report is sort of put into it so that parents know what is being done. Or something like this, right? Where this is probably a child in kindergarten, maybe first grade, who is being told to do this drawing on this piece of paper that has this information on it that the kid most likely can't read. That's because it's meant for the parents. And it says, this is a self-portrait of me. I did this all by myself. Compare this one to the one I did on May 2011 after we learned about people. So that's meant for the parents or the guardians to be like, okay, this is something that the teacher didn't hold your hand through. You did it on your own. And I should go and look at another one to compare it. And that will tell me how you've been doing. I like this right here. We're making self-portraits. We made these ink prints of ourselves from these foam boards. You'll see them in their art portfolio books at the end of the year. You can reuse the foam boards by using a hard roller with paint. This works by stamping or pressing the image on paper. Again, the kids aren't reading that. That's for the parents. Or certainly learning how to cut with scissors is important, and creating something that, again, is meant to show the parents so they can understand. In art, we have been talking about lines, but the parents need to know what that means. Lines can be made to look sharp, soft, curvy, or straight, blah, 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 going on and on, to, again, educate the parent. Or having, in this case, the color wheel done on a piece of paper that explains what's being done when it gets back to the parent, printed right on it. And sometimes doing the assessment and the grading right on the piece of paper itself. so that when it gets back to the parents understand like what was being done, what mistakes did the student make, things of that nature. All right? Questions about it at all? All right, so Monday, we don't have class. Monday is Labor Day. You can show up if you like, but I won't be here, so you'll be embarrassed when you walk up to the locked door. But you're welcome to if you want. Wednesday, we have class. I'm going to pick your brains about some things. And then on Friday of next week is when you'll be quizzed over this material that we've gone over in these lectures. All right? So then if you have any questions about them between now and then, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, go and enjoy this 3-day weekend. And I will see you all on Wednesday.